What's up, everyone? I'm James Bainey, and I'm here with Kyle Larson, and we are getting ready to do a review and then spoiler discussion on Thrawn Ascendancy Greater Good. This is it, man.
Hello there.
Book 2, right?
Yes, it is. Book 2, indeed, The Greater Good. Interestingly enough, dedicated to all those who know that when somebody uses that term, rarely is it for the greater good. I think that's how he dedicates the book. So that's a spoiler right there.
Sort of. We are going to be talking about this book first and foremost as a review. We're going to discuss it. We're going to give our scores. We're going to talk just about, what we thought of it as a whole. And these are personal opinions of mine and of Kyle's. And then what we'll do is we'll give you the red flag that, hey, now we're getting ready to get into spoilers. We'll actually open up as if you've read the book. You may be watching this video after you've finished it, or you just didn't care and just wanted to jump ahead. If that really is the case, we have another book that talks all spoilers, or another video, I should say, all spoilers, what happened. It's the plot summary, just spelled out, no opinions, but just totally what happens in the book. So if you want to check that out, you can get a vibe on what's going on. We also did that for Chaos Rising as well. So if you want to go check that out, you can start to get the trilogy as a whole. Before we get started, let's talk a little bit about the book. I just wanted to say that the book was released April 27th in 2021. It was written by Timothy Zahn, of course, and read by Mark Thompson. Published by Del Rey, and the audio is Random House Audio. And then the timeline for this book is obviously after Chaos Rising, but all the events are roughly, we're kind of guessing here, Revenge of the Sith era, maybe, because it's so over here. It's difficult to tell when the real timeline is, but, kind of based on a few other things, we're thinking maybe about Revenge of the Sith or somewhere in that range. Oh, right, Kyle?
Ish, yeah. Late Clone Wars, Revenge of the Sith-ish, because, yeah. All
right, I think we should get into scores. What did you rate this book, score-wise, and what were your thoughts?
I would give this book a 7.5. As I was reading it, I really enjoyed it. But I still think it's a great book. I still think it's a great second act book, and I love Timothy Zahn's writing. But it's really easy to get lost in this book. There's when you start, there's a lot of aliens that kind of come and go really quickly. There are a few plot holes that just kind of stand out to me that it wasn't quite as cohesive as Chaos Rising. It's very much a middle act. In my opinion, this book could completely change when we get the Lesser Evil, which is the conclusion of this trilogy. Coming up in November. But despite the fact that it might be kind of a tepid score, I do think it's a great middle act book. But it's just I found enough problems to where I couldn't rate it as high as some of the other books that I rate that high. So how about yourself, James?
It's funny that you said 7.5 because I actually pulled it in as 7.4, right in the same ballpark.
All right, I like that.
And I think it's probably for a lot of the same reasons. It's obviously a middle book, and if you've read the original Thrawn trilogy, then you know that probably the middle book is, and I don't know what that is with Star Wars for whatever reason, the trilogy, other than Empire Strikes Back, it tends like the middle one is usually the one where it's like people are like, it was okay. You know what I mean? Like, it was all right. I liked the first one. I really liked the last one. But I don't know. It felt like a little bit of a connecting piece, but we haven't gotten the piece that it's supposed to connect to yet. And in some cases, it felt like it could just have stood on its own, like it was its own interesting story. But the only thing really holding it together is maybe like the Puppet Master or whatever. And other than that, I'd say you're right. Like the biggest thing behind it is just probably the intentional mystery of it all. and you commonly feel like you're walking through not really knowing what's going on. And then hopefully you just bear through it all the way to the end, because the end is when, it all comes together, and, you feel a little bit better when you finish the book, but it's like, okay, 7.5, 7.4, some, run of the mill, wasn't too crazy. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either. Good book. So I think that's where we're at. Let's go ahead now and just drop the veil, go full spoilers from now on, so we can talk a little bit about specifics. And I say a little bit, we'll get into full discussion here. What was your favorite part of the book? Spoilers.
So yeah, big spoilers. So there's a scene when Thrawn is going to a neighboring alien species called the Patatas, because he is afraid that they're allying themselves with a group of pirates. But he actually comes to find out that the planet is being occupied by the remaining Nickardune forces. But he figures this out entirely with his intuition, and he's using basically, laser bolts and guns and stuff like that to do this kind of battle dance with the Patatas to basically fake a conflict, so that the Nickardune to draw out the Nickardune, to make them think that they're actually, going into battle together. And I'm doing a really poor job explaining how eloquently Timothy Zahn wrote this, because it really does feel like a dance. And it was the one part of the book, because one thing about this book, Thrawn really isn't quite as front and center as he is in Chaos Rising, but it is the one time in all the times I've read Thrawn that I really felt like I was inside Thrawn's head, and I felt like I was watching this like marvelous, expose of like, who's really behind, who's really pulling the strings on this planet through Thrawn, and like feeling that satisfaction. So just, it's not a huge pivotal moment of the book. It does kind of set up some bigger things later, but it just was a really cool scene to me. So
yeah. And why I think that is I think for the first time, it's not just Thrawn engaging in a battle with somebody else where it's like him versus an opponent. In a lot of the cases in this book, the Nickardune were piloting ships, or even the Chiss themselves were like piloting like these drone ships, and it was all like, okay, we're going to fire on that ship, but then we're going to move it out of the way so it looks like there's a battle happening when there isn't really a battle happening. And you can see Thrawn like pulling the strings on both sides often. So they had to like illustrate kind of not just what Thrawn is thinking and analyzing from his enemy standpoint, but you actually have to have Thrawn be the person and the opponent. So they're kind of giving you Thrawn's perspective from the other side, and you can hear the full battle through his mind in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. That's a great subtext for sure.
I like that part. When we were talking about our favorite parts, you pointed that out, and I said, yeah, that's right. That's true. I had a hard time picking a favorite part of this book because a lot of it is very slow. A lot of it is like, it's my favorite part where they talk about the farming. It's my favorite part where they're talking about this random asteroid space station or something that there was not even really a battle here. It's like, I don't know. It's kind of confusing, but there's two parts of the story, and they come together at the end. There's like the Thrawn part, and then there's the Haplif part, where the guy's like trying to. It's like Baron Zemo or something, right? It's right. He's telling the story, and you're kind of paying attention. You're like, what does Baron Zemo have anything to do with this movie Civil War? And when you get to the end, you realize he's orchestrating the whole thing. You're like, oh, okay, right? This book kind of felt like that. And when they get to the very end and everything comes together, and Thrawn is recognizing that there's these three families who are going to argue and fight over this land, and he has to like fake his own battle, and then he's like controlling this other ship, and he's shooting it in very specific spots to make it look like it's being piloted. And there's a lot that was really cool about the ending of the book. And then especially when it all ends and everybody's like, I didn't see nothing, and it's
Yeah,
like, it's just
totally.
really cool how it all came together, right?
That's
He
great.
was able to control all the different families, everybody on his ship. None the people who needed to know, but there's a reason why they can't talk about it, because there was a Skywalker on deck, so they have to be silent. It's like he pulled all the right strings to make sure that this thing gets covered up. Now, granted, he's getting blamed, and the Xodlak are mad at Lakinda, and there's a bunch of other things, but it wasn't. I kept wondering through the whole book, what does the term greater good have anything to do with this book at all? And it wasn't until the end when I realized that Thrawn was actually going to make himself look weak, like he lost a battle, and they messed this whole thing up for a bunch of these different families, that ultimately he was taking the blame for the greater good to make sure that the Chiss did not find themselves in the Civil War. And I go, okay, I get it. All of a sudden the book comes together. That's my favorite part, because it almost didn't make sense. And I was like, this book's going to get such a low rating until the end. And then I'm like, okay, it all came together. That's it.
Yeah.
What else do we want to talk about? What did you think?
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I guess just what do you think about the lore now? We stepped into Chaos Rising. We compared it to like Tolkien and stuff. Where are we at now? Your thoughts on what's going on in Star Wars over here?
I like it. I do still have that, tinfoil hat theory that like Timothy Zahn has had these manuscripts in a shoebox in his office for 20 years, and he's been waiting to tell this story. Just because he so loves this character so much. You can tell that through the writing. But I do think that, this is, if they're setting up some sort of prelude for Thrawn, because we were kind of discussing before this that, the Thrawn that we see in the books is very different than the Thrawn that we've seen in a lot of respects in Rebels, and then also what's being hinted at with the episode The Jedi and the Mandalorian, where, at the very end it comes out that Ahsoka's like hunting this Thrawn who's allied himself with a pretty awful person that I wouldn't really expect him to have any association with. So it's going to be really interesting. And then also you mentioned too that, the more you read Thrawn, the more you see commonalities between him and Ezra, and the more you think that there is going to have to be some sort of friendship there.
My thing is like at the end of Rebels, it seems like there's this understanding that Thrawn was the bad guy, and they definitely made him seem like the opposition. They're trying to defeat Thrawn. He's part of the Empire, and he's a bad guy. And there were a couple things even in there too. He says like, I'm going to fire on the people and stuff like that. It's just, they really build him up to be this bad guy. But when I'm reading the books, I'm like, Thrawn is not a bad guy. In fact, a lot of times the people he's in contention with are people that are more willing to make like military style sacrifices. And he's like, nobody has to die if they don't need to. We can find the other ways to do this. We can pull a string here and pull a string here, and then look at that, the whole thing's unraveled. We didn't need to like start cutting things with scissors. He's very tactical, and he's very do it the least aggressive way possible. And so I find it very hard to believe that he really is that bad of a person, like an evil being, So I was kind of getting the impression that later, when we find where Ezra and Thrawn are at, that they are friends, or they've come to terms, or whatever, that they're, helping each other, and he's not really a villain, and Thrawn might actually help the alliance or something, or not the alliance, but you know what I mean? He might help the good guys, in this case, to defeat another enemy, and they could kind of treat him as a good guy, and he can be like, all right, well, I'm back off to the Chiss Ascendancy, see you guys later, and that's his story, but he's like a good person. Like he won't have to be defeated. Getting back to this book, though,
I like that. But, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm saying the lore of like, we had 9 ruling families, and now we've learned more about the 40 great families underneath them and stuff like that.
Yeah, we've learned that there were once 10 ruling families, and Lakinda, who's a primary character in this book, she's a great character too. I really enjoyed her. She's a lot. It seems like this is a lot more. If you're gonna pick one, or maybe not just her, but she's one of the people who's forefront in the book, whose story is there, and seems like it's being set up for greater things. But we find that out. We find out about the 40, and we also get a look at, the other parts of the Chiss Ascendancy too. We look at this planet Selwas, who, it's more of a rural planet. It's more of an agricultural planet. We get a look into people who are kind of like Lakphro, who's a rancher, who kind of, you get the sense he's kind of at the fringe of all this, palace intrigue stuff. He's not really his thing. He's just a rancher. He expresses a lot of, loyalty to his immediate family, his wife and his daughter. He wants to protect them. But at the end of the book, you have this really, interesting dichotomy that he presents. He's like, yeah, I don't really like to deal with this kind of, political crap, but like, we all talk still, and I'm loyal to my family, and I'm loyal to my people, and I want to make sure that things, we're all in this together. This sense of unity, this fundamental unity that a lot of Chiss seem to have, and kind of getting each other's backs, is presented, as kind of a silver lining to all this, this really a lot of conflict that we read in the book, and I've read in the book before too.
Yeah, and don't forget, maybe even a more prominent example of that is the fact that 3 families show up over this mining planet, and it's like there's so much power to be had on that planet, but Thrawn's like, no, if the Springhawk is in trouble, all 3 of those families will come together to defeat the enemy, because it doesn't matter that there's billions and trillions of dollars to be had on this planet. First and foremost, we are Chiss, and we take care of the Chiss. If the Springhawk's in trouble, all 3 of those families who were ready to battle it out and kill each other over that family, or over the mining thing, which is so crazy to me, they see the Springhawk is in trouble, and they go, all right, we got to go help. Me and him will be under your command because you're technically the leader here, and we'll all go help. Yeah, it's like that's so crazy to me that,
it's a great
for
pivot.
some reason, politically, or whatever, the family, they're allowed to battle out over each other if they have disagreements or whatever. But when it comes to helping each other in this particular crisis, they just knew that plan was going to work, because of course they would.
Right. Yeah. And the other lore side I thought was interesting too is we're learning that Jixtus is actually part of the Grisk, which have been, we got a bit more about them in the previous trilogy in Alliances and Treason, but we still don't know much though. We know that they have been a threat to the Chiss. Obviously, we're finding out, this is the first time we're kind of finding out more about them, or we're going to find out more about why Thrawn warned the Empire that, like, hey, you need to take these people seriously. Like, they're coming for you. Might not be today, might not be in 10 years, maybe in 100 years, but they are coming for you. So I feel like, I'm not saying that we're going to get the other bookend of the High Republic, the far future of what happens, beyond the sequel trilogy, but this would be a great setup for a great prelude for, whatever the next big thing is in the Star Wars canon, whether that be, beyond that. So I'm excited to learn more about Jixtus. And he also hints at really interesting things too about the Chiss being involved, at some point in the very distant, Old Republic era part of the galaxy, the known galaxy. And he thinks that the Chiss rounded up all this secret technology from that part of the galaxy and brought it back. And it's all, they're hoarding all of it. And also, he has no idea how the Chiss are able to navigate the chaos the way that they are. So he's still trying to figure that out. And so obviously, the Grisk have this mighty military and this really horrible, or this horrific kind of mythology surrounding them, enough to scare the Chiss. But at the same time, they are presenting a facade of themselves the same way that the Chiss present a facade of themselves, is that they're more than they actually are. And it's interesting that there's going to be they're kind of nipping at each other to figure out each other's secrets. So I think that's something to look forward to and cool to establish in the lore.
Yeah. I remember when we were doing the Alphabet Squadron books, and I felt like I was very confused by a lot of the titles and the characters and things like that. And again, this is that tenfold. It's so much worse. Yeah. But the interesting thing that I have found is when it comes to the families and things like that is I think like what really helps is like the beginning of the book, like in the physical versions of the books, they have those like, here are the families, here are the things, and like understanding a little bit of like that naming structure. We talked a lot about that in Chaos Rising because it was the first time we'd ever come across it, but like the naming structure of understanding that if somebody is part of the Xodlak family, then their name always starts with Lak. So Lakuviv or Lakphro, right?
Right.
Lakinda, right? You can start to piece all that together. And so it's interesting because then you start running into people and it's just like they'll say their name or something, like again, like Thrawn, you're like, oh, is there. So he's part of the Mitth family. I just know that because his name starts with TH. Same as like Thalias, for instance. Like, you know, she's part of a myth because of her name and stuff. And it was interesting because I got to a point in the book where like they would start naming new Chiss characters, and I go, "Ooh, I already know where his allegiances lie," and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it was really cool. The downside of that is like that where that really started to work in Chaos Rising is they come in here and they go, okay, now there's 40 more families. We're not going to tell you all of them, but we are going to pull a lot of people who are related to those families and things like that. And then it's really confusing because you can't really reference who is who, you know? But I think given time or multiple rereads or something like that, all of that probably starts to pull together because, like we've said before, Timothy Zahn, like the puppet master, like I'm sure has this all like thought out. When he's writing the book, he's like, oh, this person's part of this family and blah, 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 blah. And it all makes sense to him. It's just confusing when you're first coming across it in the first place. Do you think it's crazy that Thrawn does not know as much about politics?
I do in a weird way. Like, but it also too, like he kind of has to be that way. Like, I can see why Zahn did that, because if he would be like unstoppable, basically. I mean, he would be like Palpatine if he was in that world of like both like the military and the political. And so it's like Zahn had to give his intelligence this hyper focus in one specific area, which is, you know, whether it's military or logistics or just that whole like being out in the galaxy, running around and knowing, like, being able to size up an opponent right away. So it's kind of perfect that there's that that split there and that void of the political realm, because, like, I think you mentioned this in our discussion of Chaos Rising, that's ultimately what's going to undo Thrawn's place in the Ascendancy, or what you predicted, I think. And I totally agree with you, is that he's being set up. Thurfian's making these huge moves. He's just been made, you know, basically the head of their family and the
patriarch,
you know, and he's got it out. He's got he's become the patriarch now. And Thrawn, that's not even on his radar. You know, really, like, he's, you know, he probably it is gonna be on his radar soon, but it's gonna be too late. So I do think that it is kind of crazy, but kind of necessary too.
I mean, like, I think it's an interesting characteristic of someone if you were to be like, oh, he's a tactical genius. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, he doesn't make mistakes. Like, he can understand the tone of someone's voice, and he can understand their, you know, pieces of jewelry, and he recognizes all these different things and all these little things, and he puts all the strings together, and everything that he does is like absolutely perfect. But he can't understand things like the politics, and I understand politics are difficult, but it seems very surprising to me that oftentimes he'll like do all these really technical things and then turn around and be like, what do you mean that family wouldn't like it if they were to, you know, like, lose all this money? Is that a bad thing or something? You know, like, I feel like they lean on the fact that he doesn't understand politics too heavily. And I definitely know that in the original Thrawn book, in the new canon, it's just called Thrawn, right?
Right, yeah.
That book, he comes and he's like, I need you, Eli, to teach me the politics because I don't get it. And I'm still like, the more I learn about Thrawn, I'm like, how do you not get it? You're like a genius, like beyond genius, and you're not like this crazy computer wizard who like can't communicate with people. He clearly can. He clearly understands culture and a bunch of other things. I have a hard time the more that in this book they're like, here's the thing you don't understand about Thrawn. His biggest weakness is politics. And I'm like, I don't buy that anymore. I know too much about Thrawn, and I have a hard time believing he doesn't understand things that are fairly obvious, even as a reader of the book. You know, I don't know.
Yeah,
so I mean, not a lot to say. I'm just saying, I think it's interesting that they really drove that home in this book, that he's bad at politics, you know, and I'm like, is he though? I think you're just writing that. I find it hard to believe that a character this smart would be bad at it. But I feel like that's the precedent you've set up for the character, but you're making him too smart in other places that it makes it hard to believe that he would be bad in both. But I don't know, maybe that's just my opinion on it.
No, that's a really good point. Especially the fact that he's so good at assessing, you know, cultural, you know, art and how that would relate to somebody's thinking. It seems like that would be very useful in politics. I wonder if it's more like he has a hard time kind of walking a winding road. Like he sees things in very like straight and narrow lines. Like we're going to point A, point B, point C. He's able to like line those things up, and politics can just be kind of a mess, you know, as you know, as we've seen in Star Wars. You know, it can just be a totally like unpredictable mess. But yeah, but that's a very good point you make.
Well, let's move on here. Tell me your thoughts on the use of the Nick Ardoon in this book, because they were like the main enemy in the first book in Chaos Rising, and then in this one they feel like they're barely mentioned at all, you know, and it feels like the main villain of this book is Haplif and the Agbui by, you know, proxy, and Jixtus, who's kind of pulling the strings, but like the Nick Ardoon are still really the people who are like the forces behind this, but it felt like they were absent. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I did. That was a problem I had with the book, because, you know, they mentioned that Yves the Benevolent, the villain from the first book, they're just like, yeah, we've interrogated him a couple times, and then that's it. They don't really talk about like what they've learned. And like you said, the Nick Ardoon are just kind of like they show up and we're just, you know, we the reader know that, but it seems out of character for, you know, the Chiss to just be so kind of like lackadaisical about it, or be so casual about it. And I think how we were talking before this discussion too, it's similar to like, you know, in Attack of the Clones, the Trade Federation is still there. You know, you see the Trade Federation ships, that type of thing, but they're not necessarily the primarily antagonists of Attack of the Clones. You know, you've got Count Dooku, who's, you know, and Jango Fett, who are kind of more the center stage, and then ultimately when you get to Geonosis there. So it's like, you know, the Nick Ardoon, they're throughout the story, but they're really just kind of like, hey, we're here too. We're being pulled along in Jixtus's big plan too, but they're ultimately kind of absent and a little bit wasted, I think. Like, I think that, you know, it would be a good opportunity to show, like, you know, aside from Haplif, who's happily going along with these awful plans that Jixtus has for the chaos, it would be interesting to show, like, you know, the Nick Ardoon, they took huge losses. A lot of them died. It would be interesting to see what they think about that, how they feel. Like, do they feel betrayed? Are some of them realizing, hey, we're just being used by this, you know, this bigger fish, who are the Grisk essentially, and that's what the Grisk are known for doing, you know. And maybe we will get that eventually, but it seemed like a huge missed opportunity in this book. What were your thoughts?
Yes, which is entirely, I totally agree with you, because the problem is that it felt like the Nick Ardoon in this book were very clearly part of it, and they were also part of pulling the strings and stuff, and you would think they would be like an enemy or a character or whatever that they could pull reference from that first book, but they just kind of didn't. And I feel maybe part of that is because they wanted to put focus on these new enemies or this story or whatever, and they were just kind of using that as like kind of a side thing. but I feel like there's something missing, and it probably is like, it would have been really nice to maybe, I don't know, like if they were to pull like Yiv out of jail or something,
Right.
and kind of given him or someone that we can kind of see their perspective and how they fit in to this whole thing, which is exactly what you're saying. Like we need that connection to see like what their point of view is on this. And I'm 100% with you there. It's just, I even kind of forgot that they were in this book. I was talking to you about it and I was like, wait a minute, who were the pirates or who were the bad guys or whatever? And it was like the Nick Ardoon. I was like, oh yeah. Like there's such a footnote in this book. It's strangely odd and a little off-putting, which leads me kind of my next point is like, did you feel that sometimes this was a very confusing story? I mean, I don't know.
Not while I was reading it, but when I would go, so like, let's say as I was reading the chapter, I was like, okay, I get this, making notes and everything. And then I would read the next chapter and be like, wait, what the hell just happened? And then I would go back to the previous notes that I took, and I'd have to then go back to the chapter. So yes, I did feel like at times it was really confusing. Like, when a new plot point would come up, I'd be like, wait, where did that come from? Or did I miss something? I kept feeling like I was missing a lot of things that were going on. And I think it's both a blessing and a curse that Timothy Zahn really trusts his reader, because, in Chaos Rising, that works out beautifully. This book, it doesn't work out so well. So did you feel like that as well?
I felt like a lot of the book was like, if you weren't paying attention 100%, then you could get to the end of the chapter and you'd be like, I don't know. It just felt like Lakphro and Haplif had a conversation about what it's like to be a Chiss or something, and it's like, it doesn't feel like super important. And then it just felt, and then like every chapter was like that. It's like, I don't know, Thrawn's talking to someone about these people or something, and then this and this and this. And I took better notes than that. It wasn't like I was writing or something like that, something along those lines. I felt like I was taking good notes, but every time I ended a chapter, I still was very confused where we were going. Like there wasn't any part of the book where I was like, oh, now it's going to get good. It was just very much like 1 + 1 = 2. And you're like, okay. And then it's like 2 + 2 = 4. And you're like, all right. And then it's like 4 + 4 = 8. And you're like, okay. And you get to like the very end of it and it's like, and that's math. That's how math works or something. And you're like, oh, wait, that is how math works. And like, so like in one way you're like, okay, it isn't like the book didn't pay off because I get it now. But I definitely think there should have been multiple points in this book where they could have at least felt like, now you're starting to get it. Or at least maybe led us down the wrong path so you're like, oh, I know where this is going. And then throw us big red herrings that are like realizations that were like, oh, no, we don't know where this is going. I felt like the whole time I'm like, I don't know where this is going.
Yeah.
Like there was never a point where I felt like I had control of the story at all. I'm like, I don't know. Now they're over here. Now they're over here. And I don't know what's going on until the end when they basically kind of just unraveled the whole story and was like, aha, my master plan has been revealed. Like Knives Out or something, except for Knives Out was great.
Exactly. Well, yeah. And it felt like the structure of like a mystery novel almost in a way. There were elements of that, except, the payoff wasn't quite, or I don't even know if the payoff, it just wasn't, you never felt like you clearly at the end of the book, like there were so many characters and so many potential motives that were introduced. You didn't really feel like you genuinely understood anyone at the end of the book. That's how I felt, maybe a couple people, but like, with a great mystery, there's usually a resolution and you have a good idea of like why certain people are doing certain things. And here it was like, okay, you know, a couple of them, basically the antagonists, but it's still murky because we have a whole other book to go. And so like there were
but
parts
I'm
of that
also
I
curious,
enjoyed,
how much do you think that
confusing.
book is even going to tie in with this?
I don't know.
Think,
see, that's the
like
thing.
when you read that third book, do you really think it's going to be important who the Agbui were and the fact that I know. I think the fact that the Chiss could potentially be driven to a civil war because of their political whatever is probably only the main point that they're really trying to get through in that this book is just establishing that even more so. Like the first one is like, there's families and it seems like it's all good, but maybe it's a little shaky. And then in the second book, they're like, now we're going to really show you how shaky it is and how crazy they can be. And that's really all that I think they're showcasing here. Cause like I said, in a way it kind of feels like it's the middle child, or the middle story, the connecting story. But in a lot of ways too, it feels like the story is just kind of like encompassing in itself. And the only thing that's really connecting it is the fact that there's like Jixtus, who's like showing up like 2 or 3 times in the book to be like, how's my plan going? Oh, not so well. Well, keep doing it. You know, oh, how'd my plan do? Oh, it failed, but not really. We'll just have to work harder, you know? And it's like, who are you? Who are you right now? You're not even part of this book, you know?
Right.
But I know you're the person who's like masterminding it. So, all right, I'll let it slide kind of thing. But I don't know. I was actually thinking of an example. I was like, when you watch like a Scooby-Doo episode or something, it's like there's a cop that you meet who's trying to help you figure out who it is. And you meet the butcher and you're like, oh, it's probably the butcher. But then like when they pull the mask off, it's like, oh, it was the cop, you know?
The cop, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I felt like in this whole when I was reading the book, it's like, fact, there is a butcher. Fact, there is a cop. And you're like, okay. Those are just facts, you know, and I didn't really feel like I was piecing it together myself, or I wasn't really engaged in the story. And then when they get to the end, they kind of explain, you know, oh, well, the butcher was doing this and it made it look like he was this person. And then the cop was really the person because he was doing this. And you're like, oh, wow, all that sounds really cool. Could you maybe have told me that earlier or shed some light on earlier in the story? I probably would have cared more. But anyway, well, I think I'm driving the point home on that. But I mean, this is just my feelings like overflowing about, you know, this book coming out here. Word vomit, I guess you could say.
When you already know who done it, kind of. That's the other thing that kind of works against it, you know. And that's the other thing too. Like,
what movie was it? Oh, The Village, right? Okay, if you've seen that movie, I remember when I watched it for the first time, I did not get the plot twist at the end. I didn't know that was going to happen, right? But when I watched it a second time, knowing what it was, I felt like all throughout the movie, they were basically spelling it out for you. Like, it was so obvious the second time you were watching it. And so I'm like thinking back about this book, and they're definitely telling you, and it wasn't supposed to be a mystery. I mean, they were straight up telling you, I'm trying to incite a civil war, and I'm doing this, and I'm the bad guy, and I'm trying to manipulate these people and stuff. And yet, sorry, for some reason, it still didn't quite feel like I was invested in it. I was just kind of aware that there was a person trying to incite a civil war, and I was like, okay. So, and maybe that's it. Maybe I should have been trying to figure out why Haplif was involved. Who is he? What's going on? Why is he hanging out with these teenagers? Do I believe him? And then maybe when he gets revealed at the end as a bad guy, you're like, oh, wow. But since they were telling me the whole time that he's a bad guy, I'm like, okay, these are just facts. He's the bad guy. I know he's the bad guy. And I'm not really interested in how he's manipulating these people because I don't know. I guess I just know Thrawn's going to figure this all out in the end anyway, you know?
Yeah. The memories
maybe
chapters.
That's it.
or the memories interludes didn't really serve much purpose in this book. They were more exposition for the exposition you were about to read, kind of,
Yeah.
like, if that makes any sense. And I like, again, like, I love Timothy Zahn. I'm not trying to sound like a jerk here. It's just like some of it, like the structure of the novel was, a bit confounding at times, that, for things like that.
Yeah. What else could we talk about here? What did you think of the Magys and the whole planet and the touching the beyond and all that?
I like that. I'm really interested in the fact that they're in the broader canon of things, that we are getting different relationships with the Force. Whether in the comics we got the rock people who were like into the Force sensitive rocks. We're getting the Magys. We're getting the Skywalkers. And then
the Skywalkers is in the Chiss Skywalkers,
yeah, the Chiss Skywalkers, yeah. And then in the Legends of Luke Skywalker, we had that tribe of people who fly on the, it's Luke going around the galaxy and meeting all these other Force.
Is that what they call it?
I think so. Yeah, it's
Current?
been a really long time since I've read that.
I can't remember what it was.
But just kind of all these different cultures that come to the Force and touch into it and tap into it, and it really is this universal power. So I really like that. I mean, it was a little melancholy, and I feel like, again too, this was like, okay, they pop up in these chapters and then they're gone, and then they're gone for a while, and people are talking about them, and I understand that they had to keep the Magys secret, because they didn't want it getting out about that they were still aboard the ship. But I feel like we could have gotten a little bit more, especially since we have, Sherry, and we had, why did I just forget the name of her guardian?
Oh, Cheery and Thalias.
And Thalias, yes.
Yeah.
Since we have them basically right there the entire time, I felt like that would have been a great opportunity. So that's, but I did enjoy them, and I hope that they're not just like a one-off in this book as well as other cultures. I hope that
I bet you the
door is left open. But yeah, I know. Unfortunately, I bet they are too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think what is, I don't know. I feel like we could have seen a little bit more. I think it is interesting when Thrawn comes across the Force, sometimes, and in this case, he didn't really seem too interested. He just kind of like took their word that it's like, okay, well, they believe that, killing themselves is the best way to move forward or whatever. But I would have liked to see him be like, how does that make sense? Tell me more about that. I'm really interested in why you think that would work. Is there maybe something these people are doing that we could use, like, I don't know, like, what if the Chiss could kill themselves and then come back as a ghost and be even more powerful than we were, I don't know. There's just something there that, like, sometimes Thrawn just kind of lets that stuff flow overhead. And I was really curious is how does this elderly leader believe that if they were to kill themselves, then their species could be like reborn, or how would it help them move forward? Because that's definitely what she thinks is the case. But even from a standpoint of someone who knows about Force ghosts and all this other stuff that goes on with like that spirituality, I'm still like, what was your plan there?
Right.
If you guys all die and you give a command that everybody's supposed to kill themselves, how does that help? And I'm like, I believe that it does, because this is Star Wars and religion is real, So tell me more about that, and I'd be interested. And I would have thought it would have been nice if Thrawn would have been the person that says, tell me more about that. Why do you think that would work? And have her kind of explain that maybe like culturally or historically that has happened 6 times before, where they came to the end of their species. So they all killed themselves and they were all reborn or something like that. And it was some sort of like cool new magical Force thing that happened. But they didn't do that. They just made them kind of seem like crazy people. They're like, well,
Yeah.
obviously killing yourself is not going to work. So we need to save these people. And when they were able to convince her that people were still alive, then she's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, never mind. We won't kill ourselves. And I'm like, oh, it's
Right.
kind of a bummer. But
A little like,
I mean, you seem like cool people, but now that it played out the way that it is, you kind of just seem like stupid people.
well, it's like, well, and what you said too about Thrawn, somebody with such a curious mind, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, like he would kind of like, you know, and also see it as a very healthy exercise for them to explain their rationale, to explain that
or
that side of it.
another thing in his arsenal that later, if he were to hear that there was a battle going on and then one of the people like killed themselves because they were gonna touch the beyond or something like that, he'd be like, oh, I know what that's all about.
Right.
I know what he was doing, and I know who other people. I know his whole history now because I learned that in this when I encountered the Magys. You know what I mean? But
Right.
I mean, now he might be able to reference it just the same way as me and you would find like an Easter egg or something. But I would have thought he would have thought that was more interesting, and therefore like it could be useful down the line in so many other things. I don't know.
Yeah.
Last but not least, I think my favorite character from this book was Lakinda. I'm very interested to see where she goes. And I kind of put that like, I want to kind of move into the where do you think it's all going section, but I want to start with Lakinda. Sure. What are your thoughts on that particular character and her now maybe potentially leaving the Xodlak family to move higher up as a trialborn, right?
Yeah. Trialborn Iziri, I think.
Yes.
And
which Thalias is now a trialborn myth as opposed to I thought it was interesting because we learned that in Chaos Rising what it takes to become a trialborn, and now that they offer it to her, I'm like, oh, she's gonna have to go through the same trials, if you will. Yeah,
totally with like Ara'lani and I really like Lakinda, and I do think she'll be like I think that it's going to be interesting to see how she gets into the political rivalry of it, because if she does become a trialborn, you know, that's going to open up a whole new can of worms for her. Whereas before she was, you know, kind of in this not necessarily like disgraced family, but she was in kind of in a purgatory in terms of like how far she could climb or how far she could go.
Because don't forget, she's merit adoptive Xodlak. It's not like she's blood or anything. She came from nowhere and she got merit adoptive into Xodlak, and now she's making a bigger leap to be accepted into at like rank 2 or whatever of like one of the 9 ruling families, and that's a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's an exchange with her between her and Ara'lani where they discuss that she doesn't trust Thrawn. You know, she doesn't really maybe there's not mistrust, but she's not all about Thrawn. She doesn't think he's this like brilliant person, but she's like, you know, I will obey his orders. You know, I will like go along with him if that's what you're telling me to do. Mm-hmm. She doesn't have any ill will towards him. So I'm wondering if that was him if that was Zahn kind of planting seeds about, you know, maybe there will be a breaking point in that relationship at some point there. But I did really like that this book kind of took the characters that we're already very familiar with, put them a little bit in the background, didn't necessarily like relegate them to background roles, but we got to see more of kind of like in Star Trek when you get to see like, you know, the lower decks or the red shirts, you know, you get to kind of see, you know, how others are perceiving these characters and perceiving what the Chiss are doing. And a lot of people think Thrawn is kind of out there. They're like, you know, he always ends up being right, but I don't necessarily like the way he gets to these places. I think
and Samacro as well.
Samacro,
also,
yeah, right,
is a character that also like follows Thrawn because he's technically not wrong, and he's like, okay, and that's my job and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I like where you're going with your description of Lakinda and the lower decks and stuff. Yeah, that's interesting.
But I agree. I liked her. I think she's a standout character for sure. And I'd be very disappointed if she didn't have a big role in the next book.
I think I do too, especially since they set her up at the end and she's like, because I would be very surprised if they were like, oh yeah, the Xodlak people, they don't really care for you right now, but we'd welcome you in here. And then she's like, ooh, that's a good offer. I think I'll maybe take you up on that. And then like never talk about it again. Like I'd be kind of bummed. I want to see where she goes.
Right.
And the other thing, what was I just getting at too? Oh, I said one of my favorite parts of the book was when everything comes together. And I liked it because it felt like it was from Lakinda's point of view, where she was like,
absolutely.
she was like, okay, I know what my orders are. This is crazy. There's this precious metal. We're going to go get it. And I totally understand what's going on here. And then when Thrawn and his first captain or whatever, like when they call in and they're kind of like piecing things together, you as a reader are in her position where you're like, I felt like I had a pretty good grasp on this. And when they're explaining it, she's like, oh my gosh, we're gonna be so embarrassed. Like, what do we do? How are we gonna handle this? And then she does this really cool thing, where at the end of the call, she says, I'm totally serious about this. If it comes to the chance that I might take shame in my family, but you see a way out and that's killing me and my ship and everybody on my ship, take it. Take my life with, you know, and I love, so his first captains was like, whoa, that's crazy. Like, hold on, we're not that far yet. And Thrawn was like, I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
His response was so good because he was very like, he was like, yeah, I kind of put that together and that might have to be the case. And I was kind of considering that might, you know, fall in. I like the way he delivered it. But getting back to Lakinda too, when she gets off the call, it's really cool to watch her be like, so earlier I thought maybe Thrawn learned all these tactics and things from Ara'lani, but this is the first time now she's like, there's no way. Ara'lani learned all that stuff from Thrawn. Thrawn's crazy. He's got it all pieced together, and like him or not, I'm going to listen to him. And that's what you were saying about it too. Yeah. She's like, I'm going to follow his orders all the way through, and watching her now finish the fight with no comms, you know what I mean? She tries to like communicate with him a little bit, but from her perspective, that's when it all comes together. And I think her not being part of this book, there would have been a big, even more so of a disconnect on a relatable level. And it would have been even more just facts. She's like probably the closest to a character that you can come in and be like, I'm supposed to be Lakinda and I'm supposed to be receiving the story from this kind of mystery standpoint. And I really look forward to seeing more of that character in particular. Where do you see the next book going? Which is crazy because we know what it's called and it's already been announced. Lesser Evil. So based on what we know about greater good, what do you think lesser evil means?
Well, you know, it implies there's a choice that the Chiss or Thrawn or somebody will be presented with a choice. And that it's, you know, basically lesser evil or lesser of two evils. That's kind of where I go with that, is a rock and a hard place. So like, what is this person? And I'm assuming it's Thrawn. What are they going to pick? What is Thrawn going to pick for, you know, the lesser evil? Whether that's somebody that's, you know, maybe the Empire is the lesser evil. And this is where we see him go to the lesser evil to kind of, you know, in his exile from the Chiss, however that happens. Or maybe he sees Thurfian as, you know, taking over his family and you know, that's basically his way. He's like, you know, because he's total tactician, strategist. Maybe he's like, okay, I need to go away for a little while. Maybe his going to the Empire is trying to build an ally for, you know, like you were saying earlier, I can't remember if we were in the discussion or before, but like he's going to the Empire to, you know, build an ally for himself and for, you know, the Chiss that want to oppose Thurfian. Because it does, when I was reading more about the grist to kind of freshen up, is that it is mentioned in Treason that there are elements of the Chiss that are working with the grist, that eventually do end up working with the grist. So I'm thinking that has something to do with that. Like Jixtus is basically going to propose a like, well, if you can't beat us, join us type of thing, and maybe manipulate somebody in that way. So I do think we are gonna swing back to a lot of palace intrigue, a lot of, especially as you pointed out very well, that that they've set up this family structure now, this hierarchy, and they've done that, and I wonder if they're doing that so that when it crumbles or when it falls apart, we realize what's been lost, whether that's good or bad or the lesser evil. So what are your thoughts on it?
Well, number one that I didn't think about is that you're saying like the Chiss Ascendancy in Thrawn's eyes becomes kind of really bad and the Empire's the lesser evil. I like that concept, but I still kind of feel like when he comes over to the Empire, he still is very loyal to the Chiss,
Right.
So I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, let's not make it so big picture. Let's focus in on the story. And so I would imagine that maybe in this way, in this book, he kind of sacrifices himself for the greater good. Maybe in the next book, he sacrifices the Chiss Ascendancy name, so that they don't become to defeat the greater evil. And so
right.
that makes the Chiss Ascendancy the lesser evil, if you will.
Right.
Or the lesser, what's it called? Lesser evil? Lesser
evil.
Lesser evil.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that potentially he makes a call that the higher ups are not going to like because it exposes the Chiss or something like that for the evil that they are, but he does it so that he could defeat the real bad enemy. And they probably look at it and they go, "Yeah, we see what you did, but you made us look really bad, so get out of here." And they kick him out and stuff.
Totally. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I forgot about Starflash, the secret weapon that is just dropped casually at the end of the book. I wonder, that would fit perfectly with what you're saying right there.
So say for instance, Thrawn finds out about Starflash and it's supposed to be a big Mitth secret. So instead he goes, "Oh, well, we need to defeat this enemy." So he exposes Starflash, and now everybody knows that the Mitth are really bad, and they've been holding these secret weapons and stuff like that. He defeats that enemy, but the Mitth are like, "Nah, dude, you don't get the ramifications of what you just did, and you've really messed things up, and you've made us look terrible, or whatever." And he's like, "Well, I'd rather we be the lesser of two evils,
Right.
Yes, you're right. We are holding these secrets. We are holding these weapons, and that's not good." And but I don't know. It's tricky because he still very much prides himself and calls himself Thrawn from that point on. So he still is a Mitth, and he's still very high in the Chiss Ascendancy. So I'm anxious to see what it means. A little bit of speculation on our part.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I mean, not a lot here. Tidbits, Easter eggs, stuff like that. There's nothing here because it's all over here in this pocket. There's no references to other Star Wars stuff that you can really point to. It's all new stuff in this side pocket of Star Wars stories. And then we usually talk about if you like this book, you'd probably be or you might like this book if you're a fan of these, but it's like all the other Thrawn novels. I don't know what else to compare it to.
Yeah.
It's a Thrawn novel.
I was thinking about that too. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like very few people are going to be like, never picked up Thrawn before, but I'm going to start with Greater Good. It's like, no.
Yeah. I would say don't do that if you're watching this for some reason.
Yeah. I mean, if you were a fan of Thrawn or you were a fan of Chaos Rising, then read this,
Right.
You know what you're getting into. I guess that's about it, man. I mean, going way back, when we started this, 7.5, kind of confusing, but pays off in the end. Not a bad book. you didn't lose me, and I feel you feel the same way. You didn't lose me.
Yeah.
We're both still excited for the next one. I'm learning to like Thrawn a lot more. I'm thinking of him as a good guy, as a person who's in it for the greater good.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
He doesn't want to kill people and stuff. So, my opinions on Thrawn are growing as a potential favorite character down the line or something, you know. And that's it. I mean, anything else you want to add about this book before we get out of here?
No, I agree. It's a nice addition. You know, not my favorite Thrawn book, not my least favorite Thrawn book. I again thought it was a great middle act, but you know, there definitely are some bits that I couldn't really look past. And you know, it is as confusing as we do make it sound. If you've read Chaos Rising, it's a pretty quick read. Like I did breeze through this book pretty good. So yeah, it's definitely enjoyable. And yeah. So.
All right. Well, that's it. Thrawn Ascendancy, greater good. Thanks for watching the video. I mean, that means a lot. If you're still here, please leave a comment and let us know you got all the way through the video. A thumbs up would be nice too. A share, like on social media, and saying, you know, hey, if you read this book, you know, if you want to know more about it, like check out these videos. That includes the What Happened in video. So that's our call to action for you guys. But yeah, put in the comments, like just thoughts, talk to us, start a conversation. You know how it goes. Sure. Other than that, yeah, thanks for watching. Where can people find you online, Kyle?
You can find me. I'm on Twitter, Kyle D. Larson, and I contribute regularly to Star Wars Newsnet and What the Force.
Awesome. And then I'm James Bainey, at Myra Trunks on Twitter and Instagram. And you guys can find me also on Resistance Broadcast twice a week. We do one video where we're talking about Star Wars news, and one episode where we're talking about Star Wars news weekly, and then another episode where we discuss and have discussion and lore and speculation on stuff. So twice a week, you can check that out with me and John and Lacey. And that's it.
Yes,
so until next time, we'll see you guys later.
Thanks, everyone.